We have split today's discussion into 3 main blocks. Sort of warm-up, we'll talk about the benefits and the value of SATs analysis. The second one, we would like to talk about the design, the implementation and teaching of SATs. And last but not least, we are going to address the limitations, weaknesses, and mitigation strategies. We are going to do this today in form of a panel discussion. This is also the first time for us that we try this in a virtual format. So we will see how it works. In any case, this will give you the opportunity to ask questions to our experts as well. So I will make the start and introducing the different blocks. And within the different blocks, you're very welcome then to ask our panel experts. So we have 2 experts today on board. It's a great pleasure to welcome you both. First of all, we have Dr. Markus Brzezinski. He's professor. Hello, Markus. He's professor at the He's professor for international politics and social sciences at the University of Applied Sciences in Regensburg. And we have Captain Ole Donner. He's an SAT specialist at the Military Academy of the German Armed Forces. However, today he will offer his personal experiences and opinions and not speaking on behalf of the Military Academy. So I would like to ask you both just to briefly introduce yourself and give us a bit more detail about your connection to SATs. So Markus, would like to start?
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I hope that you can hear me loud and clearly. I guess yes, and thank you for the invitation to the panel. Just a few words about my person. As you have heard already, I'm a professor for international politics and social science in Regensburg at the University of Applied Science. Before that, I was working as a consultant and analyst in the defense and security sector, and I was also supporting in mission and was concerned and was working in projects that try to improve also the analytical competencies and skills, also for the military organizations, but not only for the military organizations, also for the interaction between military and civil actors. I've had a lot of experiences in this context, and this was really moving me and motivated me then to join academia later on and try to improve the development of trainings and teaching for analytical skills. And this is what I'm really like to do with my students from the beginning. And in this context, I'm also providing a summer school of an international joint master degree program that is hosted in Glasgow, International Master for Security and Intelligence Studies. And in this context, we also teach and train extensively the structured analytical techniques. So I have some experiences from the practice, from the teaching point of view, and I'm also very interested in the development of those SATs and maybe the improvements for that one. So that was for my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Markus. Ole, would you like to join in and tell us a bit more about your person?
Yes, I would like to. First of all, thanks for having me. After university, I served as an all-source analyst for 3 years in a command of the Federal Armed Forces. Between 2017 and 2020, I lectured on intelligence analysis and structured analytic techniques. And during this time, we've read much of the analysis education program of the Federal Armed Forces in this field. During this period of time, I also did the intelligence analysis professional certification process run by Randall Fearson's company Globalitica, which I can highly recommend. Since 2019, I operate a website in which I try to raise awareness for the benefits of structured analysis. And since the end of 2020, I'm working at the Military Academy of the Federal Armed Forces. And there, well, among other things, I'm working on the application of structured analytic techniques for the decision-making process. Furthermore, together with Dr. Oliver Gnad from the Bureau for Zeitgeschehen and Randolph Pearson, we are currently working on the first German book on structured analytic techniques. So thanks again for having me. I'm really looking forward to this event.
It's a pleasure to have you on board. So as a warm-up question, what purpose do SATs serve, and what is the added value in analysis for those who are new to SATs? And this question goes to you both.
Okay, if I may start, I would say, of course, first of all, that it's a technique. So, and in the name it says that it structures the analysis. So, first of all, it gives us a rough guidance and orientation for those who have, let's say, in a very pessimistic way, no idea how to conduct an analysis in the end. So it's a kind of a first entry point into more professionalism into the analysis. On the other hand, it can serve also as a kind of a cookbook to some extent. If you really are stuck into your analysis, you can refer to these techniques and can improve it. So it's not only giving you an organizational direction, it also gives you a direction within the process if you're stuck into it. And lastly, I would say it gives really a good idea why you should do these or why you should apply these techniques. So it gives you an idea what kind of drawbacks and phenomena you can maybe avoid by using these techniques. So that would be a rough summary from my point of view, the benefits of the SATs.
Ole, would you like to add something?
Well, yeah, I hope I do not repeat something. I think structured analytic techniques are, well, they are mainly used to avoid cognitive pitfalls, like biases, heuristics, and intuitive traps. At the same time, they are intended to increase the accuracy of analysis, and at the same time, SATs enable analysis results to be more transparent and comprehensible. And I think this is not only important if something goes wrong, but also in case something is going exceptionally well. I think only this way we can learn. And well, and finally, SATs enable and even require that analysis are seen as collaborative endeavors. The days in which individual analysts were able to do their analysis alone at their desks are supposed to be a thing of the past, I think. And SATs can facilitate this collaborative process from my point of view.
That's certainly we're going to put into discussions. In what circumstances is the use of SATs particularly beneficial?
Yeah, it's very beneficial, of course, if you have a kind of an heterogeneous team. And by heterogeneous team, I do not mean by in the sense of that you have coming from different origins, but maybe even from different competence levels and skill levels. And I guess this is a context that you come close to, or that you experience mainly also in a kind of a military mission context, definitely where we're not all the especially in a multinational, for example, in multinational organization, where people maybe have not shared the same or do not share the same competence level. And in this context, this can give you something like a common denominator or a common code book that everybody can follow and can therefore develop an acceptance of the techniques and the processes. In this context, it's very, very helpful to give a really rough orientation. And of course, this kind of advantage, and we will come to this point on a later stage in this discussion, this is also, of course, a disadvantage because maybe it already paves the ways in a certain direction that maybe will hinder flexible or adaptive analysis, but that's for later on. So in this context, where you have heterogeneous team members with different skill levels, this really helps you to improve the analysis. And the last thing that I would like to mention here is also in the inter-organizational context, if you have difficulties to make clear how you conduct an analysis and how your processes are shaped, having something like the SRTs help other organizations or members of other organizations to understand how you come to the conclusion, how you come to analytical products.
Ole, would you like to add something?
Everything. So not in this case. I agree totally. I think it's not just between organizations, it's also inside organizations. If you have different branches, usually they after a certain period of time, they all think alike to a certain degree, work the same way, and it can be hard to even bring together different branches of the same organization. And if you have a common framework like structured analytic techniques, you can exchange and work together much more effectively, I think.
So on the one hand, SATs can serve to facilitate collaboration, but it also helps to avoid groupthink. If I get you right there. Okay, he's nodding. There's an ever-increasing amount of SATs out there. Based on your experience, which SATs would you recommend in terms of types and what stages, and probably some SATs already in mind which have proved to be particularly useful?
Mm-hmm. In this case, I would recommend to start with Ole maybe first.
All right. Well, if I had to pick only one analytical technique, that would definitely be the analytical spectrum by Viersen and Viersen. And I know it is currently not treated as structured analytic technique, at least if you look to the standard book of Viersen and Hoyer. But I think in the end, it is an enormously powerful thinking tool that can help each and every analyst. So if you have not dealt with the analytical spectrum so far, I can highly recommend to do this.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, I did. And Markus, if I can pick up this point for a second, could you give us a brief introduction on what the analytical spectrum is?
Well, a brief introduction would be that the analytical spectrum covers most analytical questions you can ask and most types of analysis you can perform. And it consists of 4 different steps, and you begin at the first step with this, which is the descriptive analysis level, and there you ask for the typical journalistic questions like who did what, where, and so forth. And as you climb higher the steps of the analytical spectrum to the second step, you ask for motive and reasons. So you ask the question why. So why are the things like they are? And the last step, the 4th step, would be the estimative analysis, in which you ask questions about the future. So on these 4 different steps, you have like the whole range of different questions, and you can use the analytical spectrum simply. Well, you can use it in multiple ways, because one advantage is if you have a question, you can try to decide on which step of the analytical spectrum does this question fit, to orient yourself and to decide, all right, what is my task? And maybe even more important, what is not my task? And then you can try to, I call it, to mirror the question down or up the analytical spectrum. And then maybe you can decide, all right, my customer just asked a descriptive question, but he will not be capable of understanding the whole range of dynamics at play if I do not also answer the question, why are things like they are? And so you can like play with the analytical spectrum, and that's very helpful from my point of view.
I think it sounds like we definitely should provide the bibliography afterwards and share it with our audience so they can read up things. Markus, what's your experience?
So it was really interesting to listen to Ole and his preferred technique, so to say. And from my point of view, I would say that my preferred technique is scenario thinking, so to say, and scenario development. For scenario development, of course, you need to have all the other techniques or steps beforehand to create good scenarios. But to be honest, in the end, forecasting, foreseeing, or estimating future development paths is very important for many organizations. And that's what I say to my students. The fun fact with scenario development is you can train it every day. You can even train it in your personal life, even if you wait for a bus. You can ask yourself, okay, when will the scenario come into reality, and how much the bus will be delayed, and for how many people you maybe meet there, and so on. As you can really use scenario thinking as something as a daily business and a daily exercise. And it's, from my point of view, it's important because we have really difficulties in foreseeing the future. We see this right now with a real life experiment with the pandemic situation, that it's really hard to say, okay, how is this thing going to be in the next days, weeks, and so on. And I know from the practice, and I guess this is an experience that many of the military analysts maybe will share on the one hand, but also civilian organizations will share the same experience, that it's absolutely crucial to have an idea of what's coming up. And there's one point that I always stress with my students, and that I had also difficulties within my professional career, to make clear what the difference between probability and possibility is. And that's something that I really would like to stress. And the scenario thinking technique and scenario development gives you a good idea that thinking in possibilities is maybe not thinking in probabilities firsthand. And the second thing is, and I guess this is something that we will discuss also later on, is it's the most important interface from my point of view with regard to the decision-making process in whatever kind of organization, also in a military organization, because people will always ask you, okay, what do you expect is going to happen? Because this is going to give orientation and direction to operations. And as a good analyst, I always recommend to my students, by this question, you need to stay very stable and maybe even denying an answer in the sense of, I can't give you a good conclusion to which one of those scenarios is maybe the most probable one. And that's also this kind of really thrilling and exciting moment in developing scenarios. And therefore, having a good training in this SIT, so to say, and having good experiences and good skills in that one is absolutely crucial. And the fun fact here is that, just to tell you a short story from the real world, that in the last year, in around April, we were contacted as a team by one of the federal ministries of the German government. I'm not naming which one. And there was a high-level expert meeting talking about the development of the pandemic and the impact to the society. And I found it really interesting that I was once again, as a professor who is maybe not the most prominent analyst if you look at Germany at all, but I was then asked in a personal meeting with one of the representatives of the ministry whether I can give him a clear forecast how long the German society will stand a lockdown. That was then, that was around April when we were in the first phase of lockdown. And I was really up there. So why do I don't have a record button? Because, when I tell to my students that this is actually, that's exactly this kind of situation where you need the training in techniques, and you need to know what are the strengths and the weaknesses of your technique, and you need to communicate those products to decision makers. That's something where you get prepared by those techniques exactly for this real world incidents, where you need to be, you need to be in the position to make a good communication in that kind. And yeah, so making a long story short, I would say, from my point of view, the scenario development is one of really crucial techniques that I also prefer and I also like to train and to teach.
That's a very convincing statement you made. Thank you. Tayo just sent me a link by share with you. Just let me do it for her. It's the analytic you were talking about. Is the one you were mentioning? It's slightly different, I believe. Or Masayo, maybe you want to comment on that one.
It is different from Pearson's analytic spectrum, because Pearson's analytic spectrum just consists of 4 different steps, and you can look it up in the book Strategic Thinking for Intelligence Analysis. And for intelligence, on page 50 is the picture. So this would be the right place to look. Otherwise, I made a German version, so to speak, because I wrote an essay about the analytical spectrum, which can be found on my homepage. So this would be, at least for the German-speaking participants, a possibility to look it up.
Okay, all right. As I said, a bibliography afterwards. At this point, I wanted to remind also our audience, if you have a question, especially now about the benefits of SATs, please just raise your hand or switch on your camera, and I will then give you the word. In the meantime, please allow me one last question on that topic from my side. SATs are also called the biasing techniques. So which cognitive biases have the most profound impact on analysis in your experience, and which SATs do you recommend to address those? Are there even SATs which have biases?
Ole, would you like to start once again? I have started so many times, and it's maybe unpolite, so I'd like to give you the chance to start first.
Well, I think it is hard to tell which cognitive biases are the most, let's say, important ones, because they all have their place in an analysis. What Pearson does in his newer works is he is trying to connect specific techniques with specific biases and heuristics. So there's, in the literature, there's you can find these things, but from my point of view, the biggest cognitive biases which are a problem, at least from my point of view, is confirmation bias. So that you are just seeking evidence supporting your theory, your hypotheses, your argument, and so you're trying to verify what you already think and believe, and you're not trying to falsify this. And the classical technique to counter this would be the analysis of competing hypotheses, for example. So this for this, and there's also, I think, a very, very important intuitive trap, and this is haven't sufficient cognitive bins for things. So if you start into an analysis project, usually very fast you get an idea where your argument is heading and what your preferred answer to the question is. And if you just start with this, you do not have the sufficient cognitive bins to process information and to regard information as important if you do not have these bins. So for this, an analysis of competing hypotheses with a good set of hypotheses also is a good start into analysis, because each hypothesis gives you a mental bin for information to process. And so, well, yeah, the SAH would be one technique facilitating these. But in the end, all idea creation techniques or idea generation techniques, or like in the new books, it's called explorational techniques, they all give you these mental bins for hypotheses, ideas, concepts that you then can use in your analysis projects.
Let me start tackling this question from another direction. And let me start by telling you my favorite dispute that I have even with good colleagues, and where we sometimes fight over it and sometimes we find consensus. And that's not dependent on the amount of beer that we maybe have at night at the bar, where we do mostly discuss these kind of issue. It starts with the question, can you really train analytical thinking? Because that's something that it's implicit with those techniques, that you can take someone from outside, from common street, so to say, and bringing into an office and giving him SATs to read, and then in the end he's able to make a good analysis. What I would like to say here is that obviously analytical thinking needs some predispositions, cognitive predispositions, so to say. You have to be some intellectual capabilities and yeah, also some skills. Otherwise, you're not able to apply those techniques. And that's one of the most important messages also, is that the techniques is not a guarantee to overcome those cognitive biases. They just are helpful indicators, so to say. So at least they give you an indication that you maybe have fallen short to one of those cognitive failures. To summarize this argument is that in the end, if they help already, let's say, I wouldn't say gifted, but experienced and skillful analytical thinkers to avoid maybe easy traps that you maybe tap into it. The second thing is that we really have right now good research results concerning those cognitive biases. Without those research results, that mainly come from psychology and also social psychology, I wouldn't say even the SATs wouldn't be possible, so to say, as an idea, as a book, as a project, as something that we really can train. But on the other hand, what we need to accept is that in the end, what you see with the SATs is something that you normally also learn in a good academic career. It's scientific thinking, right? So in the end, what you apply here is good techniques that help you through a jungle of complexity that even every scientist is confronted with, where he needs to make decisions about abstraction, how to see the world, in what kind of level of abstraction, what to select as drivers, as assumptions, as variables, as factors. And then, of course, based on critical rationalism, that is a good philosophical tradition in let's say, in our scientific community, that you always start from the point that whatever you believe and whatever you assume, the first thing that you should always believe in is that you are wrong. And based on that one, you're going to take the next steps to develop a scientific explanation. And in that way, I would say it's really helpful to steer and to control or monitor, or even giving you a technical mentoring to something that we really don't like, and that is that we don't like to prove ourselves wrong, and that's within the DNA of every human, so to say. Even scientists do not like to be proven wrong, right? And that's where we sometimes really have to reverse our thinking process, in the sense that it's yeah, to some extent it's even schizophrenic. And I do not know how many schizophrenic staff members do you already know. Not going too much in this discussion, but to be schizophrenic, it means that if you have this kind of Jekyll and Hyde person in yourself, and that's something that you don't want to play too openly, so to say. And that's making, once again, or maybe a long story really short, but that's something that really helps people to really keep on track on those kind of falsification issue, that you really always ask yourself, I guess I'm wrong. what I need to do that I can be proven right. And that's what I say. It's very important with the SATs and the cognitive biases.
Thank you. Randolph, you have mentioned so often already. Would you like to add something, since we are talking about you all the time?
Well, I greatly enjoyed this presentation, and Marcus's emphasis on foresight analysis has just forced me to change my own speech, because I was usually talking about my favorite tools and techniques, and I will lead off with a key assumptions check, and then talk about ACH and some other things. And I think about my own personal career and what I've done. I've spent a lot more time working on scenarios analysis and doing that work. In fact, we just did a major exercise here in Washington, D.C. a month ago on what are the scenarios of what could go wrong in the U.S. election and the U.S. inauguration, and put together, and we based that on doing scenarios analysis, looking at key drivers. And basically, we've done a pretty good job of anticipating most of the violence that came out. So I'm holding my breath for today. In 3 more hours, we'll have a new president, and we'll have an inauguration, and we're waiting to see if any of the other, I should backstop that with Ole's comment about having multiple bins. What we tried to do was to help the Capitol Police and the other people in DC have a much broader set of bins to think about what could go wrong and where it could go wrong, adding issues, actually even like the sewer system. And what is it, where are you not looking, what are you not, and actually the other big one we had was the insider threat, which they got on top of pretty quickly. So these techniques are very powerful as you move yourself forward. And I do find on foresight analysis and scenarios, the value also there is to really think about what the key drivers are. And that's a higher level analytical challenge. But if you can look at a situation and back off and say, what is really causing this to happen? You're going to be on top of your analysis, and you're going to have some really high quality work that you can deliver to a decision maker. So maybe I'm going to, on the chat, I'll put in a link to or give you a paper that I wrote on leveraging foresight analysis for doing support to decision makers. And people might want to just take a look at that to get a much more detailed look at the kinds of techniques that can be used to do scenarios work. And the good news is that there maybe, I came up with around a dozen, there are probably 24 that are out there, ways of doing it. And it's really a function of what kind of an issue you're dealing with and what your client needs or your decision maker. So there's a lot of variety, and I put together a table of all the ones and how to use them and ways to use them and when to use them. And it might be useful to kind of reinforce what Professor Brzezinski was saying.
Brilliant, thank you. Are there any questions in the audience concerning the values and benefits, or is there the need to elaborate a bit more on specific SATs at this moment? So yes, there is a hand by Lessons Learned account. I don't know the name actually, so just go ahead.
Sebastian, it's me, it's Ralph. I'm sorry. Just for Randy, I just posted a link in our chat to make everybody aware of the analytical spectrum, which was referred to by Ole. And looking at the analytic spectrum, I get the idea that this is more providing analytical framework rather than being a structured analytic technique to be selected. Am I right, or am I completely wrong?
If I may. So it is not handled as a structured analytic technique, but you can use it as structured analytic technique because SATs are, well, they are intended as thinking tools, and the analytic spectrum, if it is used like I tried to describe, so that you orient yourself on your question, the question you have, and try to mirror your questions across the analytical spectrum to broaden your focus, then that's some sort of what in the second edition of Structured Analytic Techniques for Intelligence Analysis was described as starter technique. So you can use it as starter technique in order to start into the analytical process with a real and good set of questions, so that you do not waste time during the analysis itself.
Would you say that the current processing design in the intelligence cycle is reflecting this? Because it talks about integration and interpretation and so on. Would you say that it's easy to kind of introduce this thinking into how does processing at the moment, according to the intelligence cycle?
Well, it is not easy, actually. If you look into the, is it the NP 17 or NP 18, the processing?
18.
18. Yeah. If you look it up, then you see what they did is they say we do everything like we did it before, and then you see the break in the logic, because then they say, and don't forget to use structured analytic techniques. But what they were not capable of doing is integrating structured analytic techniques in the process we have right now. And that's, from my point of view, the great weakness of this paper, which I tried to address when it was in a draft edition. And well, you see how it is published right now. So I have not been very successful in this, but I think this shows very good the problem of combining SATs into the process itself. Although if you think about it, and if you think about SATs as tools from a toolbox, then you can use them very flexible in whatever step of analysis in the analytical process. So you can use it whenever it fits. And I think the question which SATs you should use depends mainly, if not exclusively, on the character of the question you are trying to answer. And so if you use this as starting point, then it should not be so difficult to combine the doctrine we have already with the SAT approach.
Markus, you're also very familiar with the intelligence cycle. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, one of those factors, and that's also true for techniques. They are wonderful to give you a good idea and give you some conceptual background how you can do and how you should do things, and how to also structure and giving it a sequence. The thing that we have discussed also in another meeting intensively is a question whether this follows really reality, whether you can have really those sequence and order and the follow-up of techniques and also steps within the analytical process. Because it's definitely true that with ongoing analysis and with an ongoing process of informing and decisions, or informing your decision maker and decision support, you also, of course, change not only the expectation and the inside of your decision makers, but you also change, of course, the operational environment, so to say. And this means that you always need to step back at some point, and this sometimes really leads to confusion. Let me put the other way around. It's sometimes you can really learn within an laboratory experiment, and I would say that my university and my classroom is a laboratory experiment. I have a lot of analysts sitting in front of me that I can name students, and I give them a task, and then they move on. And that's my experience that I share, is that they really behave like analysts in a kind of a military organization, because you give them a task, and then they disappear for weeks, even for weeks, and then they came up with an idea and say, okay, this is our result. And by looking at the result, of course, you maybe have new ideas, and then you maybe change the task, and then you're looking very disappointed faces because they say, I don't want to go back to the why section. So we have got through all those literatures, through all those data. Right now we have a common ground where we would like to lift off, and now you come up with new ideas, and that's what people, of course, are afraid, and even analysts are afraid of. So what I would like to say here is that sometimes it gives you a nice architecture, nice structure that gives you an order into your analytical process, and gives you kind of really as I said, like a recipe, so that you really know what to do. But we shouldn't we should not expect that this is going to happen in reality step by step like that one. This can really change very quickly, and that's once again where you need experienced analysts that they know how to apply these steps and maybe give orientation to the team. And that's what I say. It's one of the utmost important competence and skills for those who lead analytical teams, that they make a meta-analysis of the analytical process, so that they know that maybe right now we maybe leave this pathway, maybe we have to jump back to a step and give orientation for those who are within those analytical steps, because that's really a task that stands for its own, so to say. These meta controlling of the analytical process.
Ole, with reference to the spectrum you mentioned, would that mean that we need to be prepared to move up and down within our analysis process in this spectrum? So going back to the why questions, even though we have already started to answer the first questions.
Well, if, for example, a decision maker comes to you and asks you what will the enemy do, basically, if he asks you to create scenarios, then you have, from my point of view, you have to take this question and you have to mirror it down the analytical spectrum, because when you are asked what will he do, then the ground, the evidence base for what you can describe is on the first step of the analytical spectrum, because you have to ask, what has he done so far, with which forces, and so forth. So you have to build an evidence base. And the next step is you have to identify drivers. So you have to step up on the analytical spectrum to explanatory analysis, and you have to ask, why has the enemy done what he has done so far? And this is the way, hopefully, to create drivers that will have an effect in the future too. And these drivers, they are the foundation for scenario generation. So I think, and I think that's something that Professor Brzezinski also referred to. You have to use all these other techniques too if you have a foresight analysis project, because you have to have a foundation. Otherwise, it's not a foresight session or foresight analysis, it's just speculation. You need something to base and to root your analysis in. And that's evidence, that's the past and the pattern you can distill from what has happened so far and the dynamics that led to what happened so far.
Marcus, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I would like to just add some idea on that one, because actually, I would say that, the current pandemic is a really good example where you can see where the problem is. And when we see how political decision makers base their decisions on the results of or the recommendations of analysts, so to say, as specialists and scientists, that's a really good thing to see, because I would say it's a nightmare for analysts, to be honest. And it's a good example where you can really see how it maybe even works within military staff organizations, because the analysts come around the corner and say, okay, this is what we expect, and we recommend you to do this. And the political decision maker says, no, we're not going to do that because it's maybe not to be accepted by the public, right? So as soon as they step in front of the camera and so to say, publish their decision, the analysts have immediately to jump back to their desks, because this immediately, of course, changes their assumptions, their drivers, and their forecasts and their models. So I would say that right now, all those who are working on computer models for the spread of the virus are maybe listening to the press releases and press statements of the political decision makers, and then immediately run back to their computers and say, okay, now let's see what the public makes out of that one and how this maybe will change our assumptions within the model. And by that one, I would just like to say that sometimes we discuss in these kind of very clean, rather sterile context where we see, okay, I have the analysis, right, and it's completely distant from the real world ongoing business, and then I come up with these analytical products, and then this gives direction, as the analysis will not have any kind of impact into the conduct or the development of ongoing operations or the situation at hand, because even though maybe you don't give any operational recommendations, the pure fact that maybe people know that some people are doing analysis and trying to develop ideas of how things may be going to develop, this also triggers people maybe even to change their behavior. So it's an illusion to believe that the analysis happens behind closed doors and nobody is expecting analysis to take place. I know that's maybe rather sounds a little bit philosophical in this context here, but I just want to really stress the point that we as analysts should not believe that whatever we do has no connection then to the development of the real world. We are interfering into the world, right? So it's not like back into the future that we are not allowed to intervene in the current affairs to change maybe the future or the past. We're doing it already, even by conducting analysis.
I think it's not only a philosophical question, but it raises very practical ones. And one of the questions would be, to what extent are SATs capable to deal with new information when you're in the thinking process, new incoming information? So if you would like to answer that one.
Yeah, definitely. And once again, I would like to share my real-world experience from, let's say, the real operations, so to say, military and civil operations, but also with my interaction with students. And there's nothing more that people hate more than, once again, than to revise their assumptions. And that's exactly where you have these kind of, it may not, or you should not name it stereotyping, right? But you have some mental models that you have worked hard on and where you really spent a lot of time and invested a lot of energy to develop those models and your assumptions, and you have made a lot of maybe data research and reading. And then, of course, you like to stick to those ideas and you do everything to defend those things. So we have two parts into it. The first one is that the analytical, let's say, actor or the analytical person, the analyst as a person, as an element within a process, is in itself hesitating to revise his assumptions. And that's actually where the SRT is really, giving a warning sign and saying, hey, come on. It should be your profession to change your assumption. It should be your preferred priority to throw overboard all your beloved and hypotheses. And the second thing is, of course, what kind of data are getting into this process? Where do they come from? And what kind of biases they already have by the beginning, right? Let me make one of those statements here. We have right now the ongoing, I would say, dispute and maybe I know that's maybe a hard word to choose for this situation, but I would say it's a kind of a dispute between qualitative and quantitative analysis, right? And what I can see here is that sometimes the quantitative analysis is kept to be more valid than maybe the qualitative analysis into it. I'm not going too deep into the discussion because I know we had this discussion already and weighing the arguments in that one. But what I would like to say is that by designing a specific analytical process, you always maybe pre-design the information that can feed into this process. Let's make an example. If you have more qualitative analysts on board, then you will maybe fail with feeding into quantitative data, right? As you maybe have quantitative analysts and you come up with some qualitative ideas, they are going to fail to feed into the system. And that's something I would say that's it's maybe not out of the range of the SATs, but that's something that's within the organization and the structure of the process, and that's something that we should keep in mind. And where I would say I see also room for improvement in teaching and training.
Ole, would you like to add something?
Maybe in general concerning how to deal with new information. I think that certain SATs literally force you to feed them with new information, which must then be taken into account into the analysis. And this starts with simple techniques like chronologies or timelines, which are never completed, at least in the current analysis area. And it ends with more sophisticated techniques like the analysis of competing hypotheses, which we already talked about, which are perfect for directly processing new information and evaluating them against the current working hypotheses. And this also with regard to the diagnostic nature of the information. So in my opinion, not all, but a lot of SATs are useful tools to continuously integrate new information into analysis projects, even though this might not be convenient necessarily for the analyst itself. If it comes to, all right, we have information which is relevant, but it does not feed into any of our hypotheses, because this means that you have missed one hypothesis and you have to generate more, which can be very painful maybe. But SATs give you a framework to do this.
If I may, I would like to jump in immediately to that one. Sebastian, is it okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's a really good point that you made, Ole. And just to let you share my experiences in this context, I found it interesting, and I would like to dig a little bit too deeper into that one by really, let's say, kind of a small research on that one. But what I have seen when I see analysts working with for example, hypotheses for different scenarios, that they could show up in the end and say, okay, we weren't able to develop different scenarios. Whatever we did, and even if we feed it into a computer system, the computer always come up with only one scenario. And then you look carefully into the assumptions and hypotheses, and what comes up then is that in the end, what they have done is that they stated that they have developed drivers that were unbiased, so to say. So they have to identify drivers, key drivers, and interdependencies between those key drivers. And they invested a lot of work and even said, okay, we have applied all the SATs, so we have really cross-checked them. We had the devil's advocacy and so on and so on and so on. But what you can see is that what they have done in the end, that they have just buttressed and improved their own framings and biases within those key drivers. And by that one, haven't lost the chance really to develop, as you said, stronger. And as you said, it's painful, because what you really need to go is you really go back to the start and really ask yourself, I really try to throw everything of those basic assumptions away and trash them. And then I completely start with a new approach to that one. And that's really painful and hard. And that's really interesting to see that sometimes, that by applying the SATs or having the illusion that you have applied the SATs, all the way down, that you come up with a result that is not really convincing, and really then to go back and get into the details. It's sometimes then there's even no time for it, right? And the result is then that either people complain about the SATs or just accept a biased result. Yeah, that's interesting.
If I may, Sebastian?
Yeah, sure.
All right. The first thing is what I think is interesting about this, or which shows the benefit of SATs. I do not think necessarily that these people might have seen their own mistake if they were not using SATs. So if they had just jumped from the situation now and intuitively created scenarios, then this might not even be something that they would stumble upon. So SATs in this case even gives you the possibility to recreate scenarios and to see that you have made a mistake. And the second thing is, Randy, correct me on this if I get wrong, but I mean, this shows SATs are just thinking tools, and you have to, all your biases, I mean, it goes into the analysis and you have to be aware of these. And it's not the aim of SATs to stick to the results just because you have produced them, even though you might have done the technique correctly. If you, in the end, are of the opinion that what you have produced does not fit reality, then you always have the possibility to throw it away and say, all right, we start from the scratch again.
I'll just jump in to say that I think you've nailed it exactly right. We try to tell people, don't take these as formulas that have to be followed step by step, etc. The whole purpose of the SATs is to help you think through a process, to expand your thought process, to generate new bins, to put some rigor into how you're thinking, and to make it transparent to what other people can see what you've done, and then critique it and improve it. So we always say they're thinking tools. They're ways of making you a much better, more logical, more efficient thinker. And actually, the efficiency is also important. That if you use them, you can often get to the right place faster, and you can save time when you use them. So I do find it frustrating, particularly sometimes in a military environment, that those practitioners want to say, this is how it must be done. For example, if we're doing scenarios analysis and we have 4 quadrants, and somebody comes up with an idea for, this is a scenario for quadrant 2. And someone says, no, I thought this scenario, and they argue over which scenario to use. Well, the solution is you put them both in, and both of them help you think about the problem. There's no reason why just because you have 4 quadrants, you can't have 5 scenarios. Now, that really scares some people who like process, and they like rigor, and they like to go through, check off the list sort of things. But that's why we created a lot of the SATs, to get people out of their boxes and to help them get a better understanding of what they're trying to do. So actually, with that, I've got to excuse myself because I've got a 10 o'clock that I have to get on, and I don't have a choice. But I would love to stay on top of this one instead, but I don't. I've got to jump off. So have a good next 30 minutes.
Thank you very much. Have a good day. Thanks for coming.
Yes.
See you next time. Take care.
Right.
Yeah, I would like to pick up some of the discussion points you were mentioning earlier. And I have carefully listened. I probably can anticipate your answer already. But in the literature, you can see basically 2 camps. One camp that advocates to use SATs as a given set of tools which need to be applied throughout the analysis process in a structured manner. So you start basically using SATs, starting with the definition of information requirements, all the way up to the decision making. And there's another camp which says, you have to couple SATs with intuitive thinking. My question would be, could you first on that down very briefly, because I believe as I said, anticipate your answer already. The other one is, do you teach SATs as a part of a larger methodology or as standalone techniques?
Just let me begin from my experience. That's a really huge question, to be honest, and I try to sort it out. Let me just make a first approach to the question. I know about these two camps and this discussion, and I find it a little bit misguiding, so to be honest, because it depends on what is the problem at hand. Because first of all, the SRTs are really helpful in drilling it down and narrowing down to the most essential parts of thinking and the most essential parts of conducting analysis. So for people who never ever thought about how to conduct an analysis, they are really wonderful to give you a guidance. So, and it depends on the competence level of the addressees and so to say to the target audience. And if you have a more experienced analytical thinker, then he is a little bit handicapped maybe, and he maybe will then prefer to apply a little bit more intuitive thinking, because what he did is that he has maybe translated, so to say, the SRTs in his own thinking DNA, and therefore does not need to think about explicitly about or on SRTs. He's just using it, and then he is maybe even driven by the intuitive thinking. And this leads me once again to the discussion that I mentioned before, whether you can really train analytical thinking or not. And that's something I would say needs to be clarified beforehand. What are the necessary preconditions for good analytical thinking? And that's where we're even in the science and even in the psychology, I do not find a lot of publications who give you a clear-cut answer what really analytical thinking is and what kind of cognitive predispositions you need to have that one, despite the fact that you maybe need a prefrontal cortex. But what kind of, really cognition, so to say, cognitive skills you need to have, and how you can maybe measure them, despite the fact that you maybe make an EQ test or so. Yeah, but that's something that's rather fuzzy, I would say. And if we had a clearer picture in this direction, then we maybe can even sort out these two camps, so to say. That's my first approach to that one, and then I would like to hand over for Ole maybe for another approach or another idea to that one.
Well, my approach is that the question, should you use system 1 thinking or system 2 thinking, leads nowhere, because if you read what Kahneman wrote about system 1 and system 2 thinking, then you will very, very fast see that everything we think and everything we perceive is created by system 1. So we see our environment through system 1. And what system 2 is in this context is some sort of higher judge who can reject things that system 1 has created, who can say, all right, I want new or other answers or theories, but these new answers or theories are still created by system 1. So what structured analytic techniques do is they facilitate system 2 thinking, but they're just some sort of like a cup, and inside this cup there's still system 1 thinking. So it's not either use system 1 or system 2, it's always to use both. I think what's the main point is here is do not just use system 1 thinking, because the risk that you go astray and the risk that you fall victim to cognitive pitfalls is much greater if you just use system 1 thinking. And so SATs help you to not go astray and to have a framework for system 2 thinking.
Mm-hmm. If I may, I would like to add another perspective to that one. I would say that a good analyst should master definitely all the SRTs. He should have no problem with the SRTs. So that's something that he necessarily needs to master, really. So you need to wake up a good analyst in the middle of the night, and he should really declare all the different steps and automatically should, even if he's already falling asleep, should really memorize them. But in the end, they're just, I would say, a starter for good analysis. And the really master out of analytical thinking then is something that maybe they refer to with these intuitive thinking. But we should be very careful because there are different aspects of intuitivity. The first one is that you have a good feeling for a good analysis and you know how, in what kind of way you should direct your own thoughts and your own ideas. That could also be very intuitive, right? So that you have a feeling that this maybe sounds wrong, or maybe this is something where you have a blind spot and therefore you need to go there. That's one part of the intuition that you maybe have. Then the second thing is, and that's where we definitely have a problem, is that obviously even gifted and talented analysts have a problem in the way how they really operationalize values or take values or assumptions, and even with probabilities. So we have these problems with probability judgments and guessings. And in this case, intuition could be very misleading even for good analysts. That's all the research that Philip Tetlock has done and others with the super forecasting and so on, and that's all what we know with the failure in Bayes thinking. And that's actually where I would say that we have different intuitions, so to say, and we have different intuitive channels into the analysis, and that we should also keep into mind when we follow this kind of discussion.
Thank you. Looking at the time, we are actually approaching quickly the end of our seminar. I don't know if you are available for a few more minutes. That would depend. All right, yeah, perfect. And again, a reminder to the audience, you're very welcome to ask questions as well, or comment on the things which have been said so far. So just use your hand symbol, use the chat, or switch on your camera if you want to say something. We were touching upon the limitations already a bit, especially when it comes to SATs misused as a sort of strict thinking tool, just adhering strictly to the SATs, and you probably might run into issues which actually reinforce biases or limit the thinking. What about other issues you can think of?
I guess the most prominent issue is the very prominent, I guess, several million time quoted phrase of, if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's actually, if someone is then educated and skilled in SATs, he thinks that he can deal with all problems, especially with a specific set of SATs, so to say. And that's I would say, exactly that's what I mentioned with those kind of meta-analysis. The more skillful you get, the more you also need to master the limitations and the scope of your methods and tools at hand. Yeah, and that's where sometimes the SATs are a little bit too abstract, so to say. They're a little bit too vague at some facts at some points. Where you see that this is where more specialization is needed, and where you need to drill in a little bit more. I just want to refer to one discussion that popped up right now in the scientific arena and community. That's the difference between the correlation and causation. And for example, SATs say, okay, yeah, do not mix up correlation with causation. By that, they're following the main narrative of statistics. But if you are following the current discussion in statistics, with statisticians, there is a huge debate ongoing about the importance or the point of causality within statistics, and that there's something I would say is a beginning of a turn that is trying to narrow down the role of correlation in the sense of that they're giving more importance to causality. And that would be good news, of course, for analysts in the end, because then we don't need to duck and hide behind correlation, and we can go a little bit more into the argumentation of causality. I know that's right now a very, very specialized and detailed and very specific discussion that I touched here. But just to give you an idea that even within the SRTs, there will be some developments, and therefore we need to be careful in the sense of that we don't take them as the holy grail for all the time.
So that was probably a very theoretical answer to many of us. Do you have?
I know.
Do you have a practical example, experience at hand from your student laboratory?
Mm-hmm.
You can think of?
Yeah. Let me give you a really hands-on example. Many students, of course, learn in the beginning about statistics, and they learn whatever hypothesis you have. It's what you can do actually is just to if you test it by quantitative data, you just can say there's a correlation. You never can really assume a causality behind it. And that's something that really shapes the thinking and in assumptions, so to say, and also shapes the thinking of an analyst all the way down to the end product then. But what we actually do when we connect, for example, key drivers with errors, so when we connect the dots in a kind of a mental model, we have a strong assumption of causality, right? So, and when people are do not like your analytical products, what they do is then they challenge you with the accusation that obviously you have done a wrong shortcut between correlation to causality. You know, so you have a causal thinking, drawing arrows between dots, saying, okay, that's my finding, and someone who don't like your finding say, hey, how can you assume a causal relationship here? And that's where you then miss an answer in that point, because not having those methodological debate in mind that happens right now, where even statisticians say we need to go a little bit more into the direction of causality, and we can do that one. And I don't want to outline the debate right now too much because it's really a little bit theoretical in the moment. But there's one strand in the argumentation that the causal arguments can be rested on visual diagrams where you can really see the connecting dots and the pathways, and you go through the pathways. And by a specific pathway, you can circumvene also the fact of interfering variables. And so that's, once again, sorry for being a little bit theoretical on that one. I just want to try to make it a little bit simpler. But the key message is, obviously, we are used to thinking causal pathways when we develop a mental model. So that's causality for us, right? And we support this causality maybe by data, and then we dive into correlation. But the pure philosophy of correlation is that you cannot assume causality, and that gives you a drawback in your value of your analytical end product, you know? And that's what I would like to say, that if you don't have an idea of what is possible from a methodological point of view, if you don't have the idea what is happening right now in the scientific discussion about those methods, then you will miss an answer to someone who is challenging your analysis. And that's something where I see some challenges and limitations even to the SRTs right now in the moment.
Ole, did you ever make this experience? Markus was just outlining that somebody challenged your analysis because he or she was saying, okay, that's just a correlation and no causal relationship there?
Well, I do not have one specific example on this one. What I can provide to make it a little bit fun, maybe I will post, if I can post something, yes, I can, a link into the chat, and there you can look up correlations. Like there's a high correlation between 1999 and 2009 in the USA between the number of people who drowned by falling into a pool with films Nicolas Cage appeared in. So this page you can use to display what is the difference between causality and correlation, and there are a lot more of these examples. But if I may, you asked for application errors, right?
Yes, as well. That was just one.
Yeah. So with regard to individual SATs, I think, at least in my personal experience, the danger increases with the complexity of the technique. So a brainstorming session, for example, works more or less well for each and every group and facilitator. But to conduct an ACH or maybe even a SWOT analysis correctly sometimes turns out to be very difficult for many people. And well, unfortunately, I had to make this experience even within the NATO context. And in this respect, an experienced facilitator, or at least a facilitator who has been trained as well as possible, is always needed as a pillar of good analysis, I think.
So you're emphasizing the need for proper training. Both of you, yeah.
I mean, training is just one side of the whole thing, because it's like with everything else, it's training. So you have to practice it to get good at it, because only if you practice these techniques enough, you will be competent enough to decide in which cases you should use SATs and in which cases you should not use SATs. And much more important, you have to learn how to use SATs correctly, because otherwise, if you just, let's say, you stick to the steps and you think, all right, somewhere in between the magic happens and I will have truth at the end of my process, then SATs miss their effective thinking tools. And I think some people have this this thought about SATs as magic tools which produce truth in the end. And yeah, well, in this case, they miss their goal as thinking tools.
Very important point. Thank you. Marcus, do you want to add something?
No, that I really support. I really supported the argument of Ole, and it's just to add a small story to that one. It's always really interesting to see, because in the end, you know, it's successfully applying SATs leads to a situation where people repeatedly apply the SATs, but what I also can see is that they apply them in a specific way, because this leads ones to a specific result. And that is also a kind of a danger. Let me give you an example with the PIMESIA-SCOPE thing. Everybody, if you know the PIMESIA-SCOPE thing, there's one slide in the internet that you find when you type in PIMESIA-SCOPE, and this will pop up. And if I ask people, please apply PIMESIA-SCOPE, and I don't give them any idea how to apply them, they immediately come up with that one. And I can read through all products that this was the template that they have used to develop their own findings. And that's also true for the SATs in the end. You know, they're looking for some template, how to use that one, and then they just try to transfer to their problem. And that's also a kind of a danger, that they apply those techniques in a specific way because they have learned it, approaching a problem exactly in that way.
Did you ever run into issues when it comes to the different levels, especially in military thinking, you level, the operational level, and the tactical level? Are some SATs more suited for the, let's say, strategic level than others, or can they be applied equally on any level?
Ole, that's your part. You're from the military side here.
Sorry for that one.
Well, I think that you can use, in principle, you can use each technique for each level. What you actually can do often more depends on how much time do we have. And this usually is reflective of, is your analysis proactive or reactive? So if it is reactive, so you are reacting to an external stimulus, and therefore you have to create a very fast situational picture. Or are you acting proactive? In other words, do you prepare something that prepares a decision which may take effects in weeks or months ahead? And this range from reactive to proactive often reflects the needs from the tactical to the operational to the strategic level. But in principle, you can use each SAT at each level, because it's not the level that decides which SATs are meaningful, but the questions you are asking.
Yeah, that's true. And I would like to add another finding that I have, and it's maybe also only an assumption, but what I experience is that the more you get to the operational tactical level, the more the people really are interested in the way how you came up with the conclusion. So they're really asking how you really develop those scenarios, where does this assumption come from? The more you are at the strategic level, you will not come close to those questions. People are not going to ask you about those things. But what you see there is that analysts tend to tell a lot about those techniques. And that's something that I try to teach my analysts. I say, okay, the more you're in a strategic level, don't try to impress people by the fact how much techniques you have applied, because that is going to bore strategic decision makers. They would like to know, the gold nugget out of your analysis, so that they would like, and that's something that's really weird, because in the end, you can even have no analysis technique applied if you have a good narrative, and this is going to convince the decision makers to go into the right direction, then everything is okay. Yeah, and that's where even this kind of ethical dilemma exists, because this means that on a strategic level, sometimes as a decision maker, you need to trust your analyst, and you as an analyst should never ever betray your decision maker, in the sense of, okay, I just have done an analysis 3 years ago and never ever used those techniques anymore, and I just, standing under the shower, having a good idea, went immediately to in the briefing and pop up with a nice narrative, right? So that's a finding that I have. I don't know whether you share the same experience, Ole, but I found this interesting from my point of view, from my experiences.
If I may jump in, Sebastian?
Sure, yes, please.
Well, just an anecdote. What I encountered was, if you share the results of SATs, this can lead to the end that you are not even able to finish your analysis, because the results of SATs look good, and from time to time this is enough for decision makers to take and to say, all right, make this a little bit more nicely to look at, and then give me the PowerPoint slide. And then that's, this step in the analysis process. They just take this step out and say, all right, this is the result of the analysis, and then take it and sell it to, let's say, their customers, which might not be the goal of analysis. But this is something I encountered when I was deployed to Iraq, for example.
Thank you. There is a question in the audience from Mike Saka. Which definitions of tactical and strategic level are we talking about? I think that's referring to your elaboration, Markus.
I really refer to the military definition, and I would like to make clear for Mr. Hacker that I know that on a tactical level, you maybe don't apply those techniques in the full extent. But when I talk to the tactical level, and this is also based on a real work experience. So those findings that I have reported on, they were really something that I have experienced in my role, even in a tactical unit, not during the operations, but in preparations of the operations, that they were really clever and smart questions, and they're really referring to, please, I need to understand why do you come to these conclusions, where do they come from, because then I can really trust into it. And I haven't seen these kind of questions on the strategic level, and therefore I really mean 3-star, 2-star, 3-star level in the end, and also on the political level in this context.
I think that answers the question. Yeah, he says thank you. So there's another question for Ole by Nathaniel. He's saying, you mentioned you're working on how SATs could be integrated at the decision-making level in the armed forces. I would be interested in examples. Which decision support techniques would you like to highlight, and why? What could be problems in applying in applying those in practice?
All right, as I said, I just started working on it, but I will be happy to share my results so far. So I think one fundamental problem which has not been addressed very well is that for analysts, the information is in the center of what we are trying to do. So we are trying to provide information. We are trying to provide information superiority in order to create decision superiority, so that we can have effect superiority. And we are just for information superiority. That's our playground, so to speak. The decision maker, however, has the same problem or a similar problem to the analyst, in as much as the decision maker is confronted with a huge bulge of information, and not only the mental capabilities, the cognitive capabilities of analysts are limited, but also the capabilities of decision makers, and even of staff officers. So they can just process a limited number of, let's say, entities or thoughts in their head. And in this age, so in this information age, what you have is you have an increasing number of possibilities. If you look, for example, at the whole discussion of multi-domain operations and the multi-domain battlefield, where you have effectors, sensors, and so forth. So you have a broad range of options. And at the same time, there are a lot of dynamics and factors which impact your decision and which get impacted by your decision. And as decision maker, you have to be aware of all these things. And structured analytic techniques can help you to provide a framework for your decision, also for the decision itself. And what I want to have in the course we are building right now definitely is I want to have a paired comparison. A paired comparison matrix is that you are vergleichen.
Comparing?
Yes, thanks. You're comparing each option with each other option, because otherwise you are at option one as decision maker, and you think about, all right, what are the pros and the cons for my decision number one? And as long as you think about the pros, you will be pro decision A1. If you think about the cons, you will be you will question decision one as a good decision, and this goes on to all the other decisions, decision options. So if you have a paired comparison, you have the possibility to compare each option with each other option, and in the end you have a result, and this can help you to make a decision. The next technique is the decision matrix, which adds a further feature, and this is which factor is how important is each factor for me. So for example, if you buy a car, for example, then it might be important to you which color the car has, how fast the car can go, and so forth, or how big the car is. But not each of these factors is as important as the other factors. So this decision matrix, it combines this and it includes this into your decision-making process. And the last technique I definitely want to include is the SWOT analysis, because it gives you a nice overview on what helps me to reach my objective, and what does impede me, what does hinder me to reach my objective. And then you can try to formulate strategies, tactics out of this technique, so that you can make good decisions. And you can combine all these techniques. You can use the paired comparison to sort of rank the different factors that are important for you. And then you can have the decision matrix, and you have the ranked factors with percentages. So what is how important for me? And you can then put in the strategies you worked out of the SWOT analysis as different options. And then you have combined all three techniques. And in the end, hopefully you have made the right decision. And the complexity you can grab with these techniques is far beyond everything someone can do just inside their heads. And that's the point where structured analytic techniques really can I think, have a positive impact on decision making in these times, in this information age.
Thank you, Oli, for sharing your expertise here. Maybe a last question, and then another one from a more practical standpoint. But the first one would be, how can the effectiveness of SATs, how can it be evaluated? That's maybe one for you, Markus.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for this one, for this question. That's really interesting. And we're currently working on our test platform where we can establish kind of something like a living lab where we apply SATs with different teams on different tasks and try to find out how we can measure the effectiveness in the sense of which SAT to apply in which context. That's not really a simple question to answer, definitely. Yeah, and we are far away from providing here already something like a blueprint how to conduct this kind of measurement. So what you do actually is that you do what we know as field studies, where you let teams work on the same task with different methodological settings. And of course, this is nothing like a controlled experiment that we maybe know as a gold standard for experimentation and good research, so to say. But it gives us first ideas and can give us a first direction where we can then develop further ideas how to get really into good investigation. So making a long story once again short, we try to establish a training platform, and therefore we are really happy to have the opportunity to get in contact with experts like Randy and also Oli and others, and even being part of your network, because we need the real world practitioners in these kind of tests then, okay? Because one of the biggest failures, and that's also interesting with the cognitive bias thing and so on, all the scientific results from psychology, most of them come from tests that were made with mostly white students, male white students from American universities in the end. And that does not mean that this really reflects how really humans tick, so to say. So yeah, we try to establish a living lab, we try to establish a test platform and see how far we can go there. Not really an answer, I know, but at least a promise.
Well, at least there. Is that a question which covers or in the practitioner's field? The question of effectiveness?
Well, it's at least a question that I asked myself too, and I would love to see more studies and more literature on this. But if you look at the literature, it's very thin, so you're not able to find a lot about this topic. And I think one main reason is that it's a real challenge to create a comparable setting in which test persons and SATs really can be tested. Since I'm just a political science student guy, I do not know how to fix this, but I'm very, very happy that Professor Brzezinski is working on this. So I'm looking forward to see the results.
You're invited to join us every time.
Please send an invitation to us as well. That brings me maybe to my last question. And again, the audience is, of course, very welcome if they have anything to ask a question now, or use the hand symbol to indicate that they want to ask something. We were talking about SATs a lot now, and maybe this topic is new to many of us. Where shall I get started? If this topic is new to me, what's your recommendation? What shall I do the next day if I want to get engaged with SATs?
Ole, that's your part.
Oh, right. If someone really is interested in learning about structured analytic techniques, and especially to understand the background, why is this important? If I do not understand why this is important, then I may not be so motivated as I need to be to really master this topic. Then I would advise to first read Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. Afterwards, I would recommend to read The Psychology of Intelligence Analysis by Richard Hoyer, because he adapted a lot of the things that Kahneman and others discovered and tried to transfer it into the world of intelligence analysis. And although the book is 30 years old and the papers on which the book is based are even older, the book is still simply brilliant. So I really recommend this book, and you can download it for free in the internet. And afterwards, you can do, for example, an online course like the Critical Thinking Fundamentals course of Randy Fearson's company Globalytica. And otherwise, you can buy the book Structured Analytic Techniques for Intelligence Analysis, which now is out in the 3rd edition. And then you have to try to use SATs. And if you can, go to an experienced facilitator, because otherwise it will be frustrating, it will be hard, and the results may not serve what you are trying to accomplish. So this is the hard part, the SAT part, because it is not done by just reading the book cover to cover. You have to use these techniques, and you have to see how an experienced facilitator is using them. And I know from my own experience, what helped me the most in getting where I am, where in the very early stages to visit real life courses, which do not exist right now, but real life courses with Randy Fearson, and just to see how is he applying these techniques in real life, because there is a difference between what is written on the books and how it is performed in real life. And you have to see this with your own eyes in order to be capable to at least start off somewhere. So yeah, this would be my advice. Buy these 3 books, work through these 3 books, and find an experienced facilitator or a training, and then practice, practice, practice.
Markus, your turn.
I fully agree with Ole, first of all. Another recommendations that I would like to give for all who would like to train their own critical analytical thinking is 2 things. First of all, do a good reading in whatever topic you're interested in, and do a reading. So try to get close to literature or data that is at least trying to touch the issues from a first-hand perspective. That's, because then this is also already triggering some ideas and thoughts about the problem at hand. Many people just using conclusions that were made by others, that are based on conclusions by others that have maybe heard someone saying about someone hearing someone saying about something, right? That's something that I really would say that that's important. And the best analysts I have ever met, they were all people who have started reading about subjects on their own, to taking a book in their hand, looking documentaries, or even talking to people who are affected or related to those issues that they're interested in. That's really something very important, because no technique will help you out from the misery if you don't have any background idea what you're talking about. And the second thing that I would like to recommend to people is, and especially to young people, that they should not only consume books or movies or Netflix series, whatever. sit together and discuss. Discuss those things that you have seen, that you have experienced in there. Discuss your assumptions. Discuss maybe further developments of a story that has not evolved yet, even in a kind of a series or whatever, and exchange those viewpoints and try to get used to a good culture of discussion and discourse without debating and fighting too much over it to each other. That would be something that I would recommend as a first starter, and that prepares you good for SATs too.
That's great, thank you. So one last chance for the audience to ask a question. Just let me comment on how we proceed, because many books have been mentioned now. We will make the effort for you just to, as I said, write them down in the bibliography and then send them to your email address. So you get the protocol of today's session, as well as the references which have been mentioned so far. Please make sure, if you joined us via social media, send your email address so that we can reach you to the email address I just posted to the comments section, which is civilmilitary-analysis@cmic-coe.org. So just copy that address for your future reference, send us an email so that we can provide you with the information as promised. So are there any questions at this particular moment? Well, it looks like that we can call it a day or a seminar. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us. It was a pleasure talking to you. We will continue the seminar series, and we'll talk also about selected SATs in the future in more detail. We will keep you informed about this, so we will announce any future seminars via our social media channels, as well as through the contact email list we have so far. So please stay tuned, check your email inboxes, and tune in the next time then. And thank you very much again, Markus and Ole. It was a pleasure.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, see you next time then. Take care.